Welcome to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, with thought leader and award-winning author Yvette Bethel. This podcast provides you with insights and ideas you can use to reinvent your culture through trust and the principles of interconnectivity, flow, and balance. At a time when the world is rewriting the rules of work, traditional leadership practices are not enough. It's time to perceive persistent challenges through a new lens. It's time to evolve.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. And this is your host, Yvette Bethel. And the topic of this episode of Evolve is from degeneration to regeneration, transitioning from corrupt to healthy organizations. And we have with us once again, Edwin. All right, so you've become like a co-host now. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Well, I love having these conversations. They're always very stimulating. So
I guess I'll just start by talking about corruption. We spoke about it earlier this week, and from my perspective, corruption goes beyond people behaving badly, like theft and kickbacks and fraud and on and
right.
on. I do view corruption through the lens of a decaying system. For example, you can have a communication system, and over time, it can become more and more corrupted by the lack of transparency or disrespectful communication or badly or poorly timed communication, whatever may be the case. So I'm just opening the floor for the conversation. So what are your thoughts on it?
So I think, as I usually do, Yvette, I like to come in really broad and then narrow down. And for me, this topic of corruption is really, really fascinating because it goes to a pretty deep level here. The way I see corruption, and there are many definitions out there, but for me, it's a violation of the implicit social contract that exists in whatever context we're talking about. And that word implicit speaks to part of the problem with corruption is we have this kind of social contract of how we should behave for ourselves and how we behave in relation to other people, but it's not an explicit contract. And that how we see that kind of social contract can vary depending on generation, or the culture or the subculture where we're living in a particular country, etc. It's an interesting thing because if we think about actual contracts, we can have lawyers who will spend months arguing about the meaning of words and finally nail down a contract, and then they'll still argue about it afterwards in court. So when we talking about an explicit social contract, there can still be a lot of ambiguity there. And then we start to talk about the implicit social contract, just huge gray. It's basically just all gray areas. There's very little black and white. The black and white's the exception there. And so take that as our kind of context and then look at human behavior. So one of the things that I see, it's just my personal opinion, I call it the universal law of self-interest. People tend to behave predominantly in a way that's serving themselves. Now it can seem a little complicated. Like, I'm a father, I will do things to serve my children, and there is a degree of altruism there, but to some extent, I'm also serving myself there. I'm fulfilling my ego need to be a good father, etc. So even in my altruism, I can be self-serving. So people have this very strong predilection to do things that are in their self-interest. And they live in this ambiguous social contract or social context, and they learn how to maneuver in that. So, and I can see this like with children on the playground. You can have a game where the rules are pretty clear, but people will start to try to bend the rules and arrange things to their advantage. So this is just like part of our innate human nature that even when we're in a social context like a game, we will often it's common that people will continue to see through that through the lens of like, how do I get the most out of this for me? So now we take that kind of general understanding of human nature and we start to transfer it into the organization. And I think we start to run into these problems that organizations are systems. They're very organic and they're very opaque systems oftentimes. And while we as corporate leaders may make some efforts to, for example, say a value statement or a vision statement where we're kind of putting some things out there like this is the way we are, those are still very minimal, right? And so people come into these systems and the game is in play, right? How do I do what I need to do for myself or for my role or whatever? And how do I make these things happen? And so you start to see, as you said, the kind of the degradation of the pure system. Like we're going to set up the company like, this way, and then things start to get a little bit blurry, and there's all kinds of reasons for that. Like, well, I got to get this done, and this other department's not being responsive. I'm going to go around them, and so these behaviors of doing things that are maybe not completely kosher, but we're still, working together on this. This tolerance of the gray area starts to develop and take a hold, and those things become ingrained in the organization. And it's not too many steps before you see corruption starting to creep in. So
I think this is a good place to kind of talk about an example, give an example of what you're talking about, because what you're referring to is what I call in my work micro changes, where
right.
you have those social contracts, just informal rules uh,
Mm-hmm.
that it coexist because they're existing along with the formal ones.
Right.
And they start to shift. Now, there's several things that can trigger a shift. And to give
Right.
an example, one would be you're bringing in a new manager. They
Yes.
have before that a manager that has integrity, and they're all about equitable treatment
Mm-hmm.
and supporting the staff and developing the staff, and things that make an environment or a system healthy.
Right.
Now, if that manager is promoted and someone else comes in and they have a different work ethic, they have a different character, there are different things that are important to them,
Right.
you can see what we call the micro changes or the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
But micro changes don't need to have a decaying effect. They can actually have an
Right.
evolutionary one. But
Right.
but for those that are corrupt, they may introduce, it comes in really slowly with like favoritism. It starts like
Yes.
that. And
which
then,
is which is a common human thing. Like if you think about the playground and the picking the teams, you pick your friends, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
just what we do as human beings. So we're finding that some of our natural behaviors in the corporate context maybe are not the greatest things. So
Well,
favoritism being a good example.
it depends, because favoritism can be troublesome, but when you're balanced and you reward people and recognize them
Mhm.
appropriately, and you are also developing and building people, then it's not, obvious favoritism. But when it's like, I need to get the work done. This person can deliver it, no matter how much I pile up on them, they're gonna do it, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna give it to them. And whatever they need, I'm gonna give it to them as well because they're doing something for me. I'm looking
Yes.
good.
Hmm.
And so it's a quid pro quo that happens,
Right.
that kind of generates this and perpetuates the favoritism. And then that person who's the favorite might start to feel entitled.
Hmm.
And this is how the
Right.
corruption starts to
Yes.
shift the entire culture.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there, that is there are these gray areas, meaning that there's the white and the black mixed together. There's the
Mhm.
pros and the cons, and if we look at our world as substantially gray, we're always having to balance these pros and the cons of how we're interacting.
Yeah,
And so what we're seeing there is, maybe the balance is off, or maybe,
right.
maybe this factor is really critical or has a much bigger impact than we realized, or whatever. And what
Yeah,
starts to happen in that complex social dynamics, things start to shift in ways
that's right.
that we don't anticipate. And I think we've talked about this before, we have a hard time anticipating complexity.
Yeah,
So we do something, we don't know how that's going to ripple out across the organization. And what we had talked about previously in one of our podcasts was the need for those feedback loops.
yeah,
So as those things happen, you're getting really quick feedback so that you can make those micro adjustments to try to balance out the micro adjustment you just made that's having the unintended consequences.
yeah. I was reading something, I forget what they called it, a reciprocal ledger,
Mm.
where it talks about if some harm was done within the culture or the system, um, you need to offset it with a specific action to address the harm. But sometimes people just kind of bring in new things and make changes, but the specific harm that was done isn't actually addressed. So when you kind of implement a ledger, you're balancing, you're
Right,
addressing it very clearly as you move through this balancing, a dynamic balancing process.
right, right. I think this is where, again, the work of the leaders in organizations come in. They have to ask themselves, in the end, what is it that I want? For example, do I want maximum sales, or do I want a healthy culture? Do I want a sustainable organization over the next, 30 years? Or is my exit strategy an IPO in 5 years, and I got to bend the books and make it look really good? And
Just
so the in a sense, where our balance point is kind of is going to tell us a little bit about the balance that we'll ultimately achieve. If it's not a human centric balance, then we're not going to have a human centric balance. We might have a balance sheet balance, different factors.
there's one thing, or I don't know if it's a caution or something to think about. But you mentioned that you need to think about what it is that you want. If you want a healthy culture, then you do certain things. But there's another layer of complexity to that,
Mhm. Mhm.
where the intention and the action may or may not line up.
Right.
So you have some leaders who have good intentions, but the way they carried it out, the skill levels like the emotional intelligence, their ability to build and maintain trust or communication, whatever it is,
Yes.
the skill level isn't there. And so it ends up causing more decay than evolution.
Right. And I think, as I'm thinking through this, you know how I think. I tend to think a lot about waves. And if you see this, like when people are learning something new, like riding a bicycle,
Mhm.
they have their intention to go straight, but maybe their balance is a little off, and they'll start to go one way, and then they overcorrect and they go another way, and they end up kind of swerving back and forth, right? And in that case, we're using that as a metaphor. The goal is that straight linear movement, right? And the further we get away from that is that idea of corruption, or the less ideal situation. So what can happen is when you have people in your organization that don't have good feedback loops, who don't have the kind of the soft skills of leadership to correct things, which is a subtle correction. Okay, the soft skills tend to be more subtle corrections. It's to bring you back on course. It's not to overcompensate. When you have those less skilled people at the wheel or at the handlebars in this case, they may react to the situation by going to their subordinates and shouting at them, and then the swerve just gets bigger and bigger until things can go badly. It's this idea of the oscillation, and I think this is where really skilled leaders come in. That they're continually sensing all of these tendrils that they have into their organizations, and they're making these micro adjustments. It's almost like when I'm driving down the interstate, I want to stay nice and steady and straight. My hand on the steering wheel is just making like quarter of an inch little adjustments, tiny little adjustments to stay on course. It's not big swerving things. So as it comes to like the corruption, this idea of the devolution of your most optimal system into a less optimal system, that is often coming about over time as poor leadership is basically introducing this swerve into the organization, and eventually you can end up in a ditch.
I'd like to comment because you mentioned good leaders make adjustments. In order to do that, I think they have to have a whole different view of what leadership means. In particular, with reference to systems leadership, ecosystem leadership. And that means that you need additional, new, modern leadership skills. Like one of them that may not be as highlighted as, others would be alignment. How aligned are we with our core values?
Right.
How do I, a second one is attunement. Like, how do I
Right.
attune to these micro adjustments? Like, do I need a pulse survey or, what focus groups or interviews? Like, what do I need to tune into these micro shifts? Because
Right.
you have micro and macro shifts that
Mm-hmm.
macro ones are much, easier to detect, and they're most likely external. Transformation versus change. Like, how do we bring about transformation? How do we use trust to do that? So what are the new skills? How do we, because the existing skills are so focused on command and control, and they don't give you the freedom to actually lead. You do need true. I wish there was a different term because leadership
Sure.
is really management
Yes.
when you really break
Right.
it down. But
Right.
what are those key skill sets that now need to rise to the top? I don't think all of them are new, but certainly they're not emphasized. So what do we have to emphasize that's different?
Right. Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's receptive skills and then there's expressive skills that we're talking about here. And to be honest, both of those are very nuanced skills. These are skills that should be coming along with seasoned leaders. Somebody who's been a leader, they should have had the time in their life to develop them. Now, that is not going to be the case all the time. You've also got people who are promoted to the level of incompetency. So they're in a sense the root cause of some of the degradation that happened in our systems. They're incompetent. But a seasoned leader is going to know the people he's leading. And I think that's not just saying know your direct reports. You're going to know, for example, if you have a company and you have a factory it is incumbent upon you to understand the mentality of your factory workers. Because if you're not understanding how the part of your organization that's essentially the productive part, if you're not understanding how they think about things, what's important to them, you are going to make some errors. So, for example, it seems for our foreign listeners that this may be funny, but in this area, hunting is almost like a religion. And any factory owner who thinks he's going to put in weekend shifts and double time over the hunting season is going to find out very quickly that is not going to lead to the success of his company. People will resent it. They won't forgive that person because it's like a religion here. So having some insight into the way that your people think, their mentality, is super important. That's part of those receptive skills, okay? And you have, within a big organization, you're going to have many subcultures that you need to have an idea of how something is processed by those people. So it's this sense of knowledge. I think the leader should be cultivating relationships and looking for people in his organization that are going to be trusted messengers, not people who are just going to say what wants to be heard. I think that's often a downfall of leadership. They start to surround themselves with people who make them feel good. So that kind of ego, strength, and humility, that when somebody is bringing you news that you're not wanting to hear, you're welcoming that news, and you're actively listening and trying to understand what's being said to you. So basically, we got a whole set of soft skills that relate to being receptive to the inflow of information. Then you have the soft skills that have to do with communicating the information, which is what we were talking about, making micro adjustments. So maybe we communicate to someone, we've got to change this program, or maybe we're giving a speech at the annual shareholders meeting or whatever. But that really goes into communication skills, not so much. And I think a lot of people, the less experienced ones, will get this wrong when they're communicating. They're thinking, what do I want to say? The real question is, what do I want them to hear? And what is the change? In a sense, if we go to this idea of the micro adjustment, what is the adjustment that I want them to make? And how do they need to hear that for them to make that adjustment? If that makes sense.
I don't, all right, that's a complex statement you just made, because I wanted to make another point, but you caught my attention. Because with communication, we all have filters, and what they hear, even though what you may have communicated seems clear to you based on your worldview and filters that make
Yes.
up, what they're hearing can be clear to them too, but
Right.
through their filter. So this thing about what are you wanting them to hear is very complicated, because
It
they
is.
most likely won't hear what you intended. They'll hear
Right.
what their filter translated it to be.
Yes. And I think this is where, when I said I wanted to start broad and we were talking about
Okay.
kind of these, basically the social contract, which is baked into various worldviews. Okay. I think it's not as foundational as worldview. That's even deeper, but they tend to be these different ways of processing information and seeing the world. That's essentially what's happening there. And you, as a leader, should be fluent in some of the main things there so the main audiences, you should be understanding your audience. But there's another piece to this, because in the end, it's difficult to craft a message that speaks to every audience that's delivered at the same time. So like a major meeting or something, that's different.
But I want to say something else, because one of the things that I play with a lot maturity models. And when I'm working with a client, I'll go into AI and we're working on a certain skill set. And then I build out a maturity model just to help them to see if they're at the reactionary transactional end of the spectrum, or are they at the generative end, or are they
Mhm.
somewhere in the middle? And
Right,
I think this will help to bring what you're talking about to light. Um, because a lot of these leadership skills, if they are at the transactional slash reactive end of the spectrum, the manifestation of the skill would be very different than if they're balanced or in a regenerative mode that's really can tap into nuance and the idiosyncrasies and detect things that are very difficult to see and understand, right?
right,
So when I think about leadership, I try to understand where the majority is at.
right. Yes.
And if the majority will be at the bottom or the one end of the spectrum and they need to move up, this whole the corruption system can continue to languish
Hmm.
because for whatever reason, it work whatever they're doing is feeding the system, and the way that they're doing it is feeding the system. So we help them to
Hmm.
move and shift and change their mindsets and heart sets, then we can start helping them to move along the spectrum, just to start shifting from corruption in whatever form it's showing
Yes.
up in into
Yes.
something that's more healthy.
Yeah, and I think you said something there, the mindset and the heart set. And I think when we're dealing with people, we are dealing with both of those in a
Right.
sense, persons inside of the one person, right? Their emotional side and their intellectual side. I think on the intellectual side, again, if we go back to this idea of like social contracts and the understanding of things and how they can be so different, and it's all a gray area anyway, and it's implicit. One of the things that we can do to communicate to the intellectual side is just be very explicit about things,
Mhm.
saying, hey, we know this is a gray area, but these are our expectations. And I think it's something you have to do there is when you are making those explicit statements, do yourself a favor and think through what you're doing.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was gonna say, because if they communicate it and it's coming through the obvious filter,
Right.
it may be in their intent to be transparent, but it still can be mutated.
So an example of this would be for let's say you have an organization and you have salespeople, and salespeople are, salespeople generally are motivated by their bonuses, etc. They tend to be money voted, which is what you want to do in sales, and they will hustle and do what they need to do to make a sale. Some industries, their culture is such, like the salesman might be out whining and dining people and
Mhm.
taking them on golfing trips and doing all of these things. Now, if the corporate world says, well, that's starting to like blur the lines on some like kickback laws and blah blah blah, and we want you guys to stop doing this. Recognize that if that's the way the whole industry is structured, and you suddenly step away from that norm, that's going to
Yeah,
show up really quickly in your sales,
that's right.
right? So this would be what you would say is a overcorrection. Hey, here's the thing. Let's just take this big action right now. Massive overcorrection, and then you're going to get a counter correction, and next thing you know, you're all over the place. A better way to handle that is to say, look, hey, salespeople, whatever, the director of sales, here is this thing this problem that we have to address, but we also recognize the complexity. Let's talk through this. And it's that talking through something, the iteration of how do we solve this. That's where the listening can take place.
Mhm.
that's where we can start to implement the micro corrections. Okay, let's try this, and it's a much more iterative, small steps and a teamwork based thing. You're employing the affected constituency in that process, and I think this is all pretty common management practice theory nowadays. Not always practice, but
Well, I think I like the example you gave because that is just wonderfully complicated or complex because
right,
you may have a culture or a country where kickbacks, we call them kickbacks, but
right,
that is a part of their system, so they budget for it.
yeah,
They have no,
yeah,
it's not an ethical issue. There are no laws or it's no issue around it. And
yes,
they know that that's how they sell. And
right,
in other countries, it's seen as, under the table, blah, blah, blah,
absolutely,
right?
right.
So then how do you engage with an organization in another country that has absolutely no ethical issue with it because it doesn't fall within the scope of their, the ethical boundaries.
Yeah.
It's
Well, that,
it's within their ethical boundaries.
yeah, I think that's a great question, Yvette. I love that. I think one of the core tenets of my belief is look at the world as it is, not how it should be, right? You want to know what you're actually dealing with, not the idealized version of things. And corruption is a part. Human beings corrupt the systems they make. This is what we do as a species, and we spend all of our time in this tension between creating systems and tearing them down. It's an interesting thing we do. But we're the source of these corruptions, and we need to recognize that the confirmation that that takes in various cultures or subcultures can be very different. Yes, some places there's one way of doing corruption, you give a guy an envelope of money. Another one, there's like, hey, come to my party, and
Right.
maybe you'll get some great stock chips at the party or something like this.
Some
There are
other,
so many different ways corruptions
some
can
other something.
but I think organizations need to be rooted in reality. What, like, if you're going to go into a new country, find somebody who can actually tell you what's actually happening, not the idealized version. Like, I was doing business in Europe one time. The country had this perception of we're a modern democratic society and everything's by the books. And I got to a certain place in the business transaction that I was like, oh my goodness, these people want a bribe. That's what's happening. Okay. Nobody told me that's what it was like doing business in that country.
Right.
Right. So, first of all, you have to be open to what the reality is. And I would say this, if you want to do business, you have to engage with reality. And this is where you would come in, practically speaking, with your lawyers, etc., and say, okay, this country, it's very corrupt, and we're an American corporation. We can't do business like that. But we can create a company in that country that we can have agreements with, and where, I mean, this is where a lot of the law firms and the big accounting firms and stuff help facilitate, is bridging those kind of crossing over those legal walls. And I
Yeah.
think that's appropriate. You don't want to be, I mean, if you're an American corporation, you got to follow the American laws. That's just the way it is.
I think that's one response to it. Some would decide, well, we're not going to do business in that country. And then there may be other creative solutions that organizations come up with once they take a deeper look at their core values and talk about how does this apply to doing business in this country? And how can we stay within the bounds of the core values, or can we?
Yes. But I do think it is possible. I think that first point you made is critical. I mean, from my perspective, corruption is rampant. So anywhere that you do business, you are dealing with corruption, whether you know it or not. It's in the system. Whether or not you're recognizing it and whether or not you're interfacing with it, that's a different thing. A lot of people live in kind of a la la land of everything's ideal,
Bubble.
and yeah.
Yeah.
So I think your first choice is, do I want to even go down that road? And in my case, I was trying to open an office in Europe. I was like, you know what? I don't want to go down this road. So I'm not doing this. If that's how it's going to be as I try to transact business in this country, that I'm having to like give bribes all the time, it's not going to happen. So I just shut that whole thing down. Like I'm choosing not to go there. That's a very important point. And then if you do choose to go there, to your point, I think you have to ask yourself, what can I do to uh, to live up to my values in this situation? Which is it really important? Because
Yeah.
if let's say you're an American corporation and you've got a subsidiary in South America and they're doing all kinds of shady stuff, that will leak back into your American culture.
That's
People
exactly
will be
right.
aware of that.
Yeah, even if it's
And
legally okay.
so it's almost like a hidden cost. It's like, okay, let's go into South America and you can account for various kinds of costs, but you also have to account for that hidden cost and how that's going to affect your organization.
Yeah. In terms of morale, engagement, further
Right.
corruption, because
Yes,
someone could look at that and say, well, hey, they're doing it there.
exactly. And it's that idea of the one bad apple ruins them all.
Yeah.
I think once you start to get that, because the other thing about corruption is people are doing these things for a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Minor level corruption may just be like, I don't want to work so hard or something. I'm going to cut a corner. I'm going to do this, right? That's the benefit they're getting. I didn't have to work on Saturday. Okay, fine. But then you as you start to escalate into things that are more material to the existence of large corporations, people are doing that for material gain often, or career gain. There is a meaningful gain they're getting out of that. And once people figure out that that is a play that will benefit them within the context of your organization, it's very hard to get people to stop doing that. So you do have to protect against allowing those bad apples or those bad influences into your organization.
There's something that I call corruption creep,
Mm-hmm.
um, where uh, it can start off sometimes as, small corruption, like what you described, like maybe someone's being lazy or whatever. But it could be, I've seen in a situation where it started off for a noble reason.
Yes.
I'm all for stuff and you have to stand up and blah, blah, blah. It started out like that. And
Right.
then that started to justify things that were not ethical.
Right. And
But
yes, exactly. And I think you have to, as a leader, you have to be tuned into what's going on and recognize that sometimes people are going to make bad choices for good reasons. Right. I mean, they're doing it somehow. They're like, well, I'm going to do this so people can. I've seen this all the time. I'm
yeah,
going to make this decision because if I don't, people are going to lose their jobs.
yeah,
Okay. And you're like, well, I get it because you got all these people these families that depend on you and your, whatever. It seems so altruistic, right? But once that pattern has been laid down, it's so much easier to go to it. Like, oh, I'm going to do this because the quarterly earnings really need this bump, or
yeah,
I'm going to do it because I want to hit my incentive plan for the year,
yeah.
right? So it can start out in a way that seems noble, and over
Or
time becomes,
reasonable, and then
yeah,
it corrupts.
yeah,
So
it's that slippery slope thing.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. So
and
intention and alignment all the way through. You
yeah,
gotta
the
align
the
with
other I
time.
was going to say the other thing with it, we talked about mindset, but also the heart set. I really
Yeah.
think this is where exemplary leadership comes in. That you are in. all of your actions, you are living out the ideals, right? That's what people are seeing and processing with their heart. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go down to the company cafeteria. As a CEO, do I expect people to get out of my way and let me to the front of the line? Or am I going to be the one who's letting somebody else go in front of me, or buying somebody else lunch,
Right.
or whatever the cases are? I mean, and that's a trite example, but it's those decisions. Like, you're sitting in a meeting and somebody wants to share something. Do you let them speak, or do you cut them off? Are you creating an atmosphere that's receptive to that feedback?
Right.
Or even like somebody says something in a meeting that nobody wants to say. Does that person appear to be then punished or praised for that? It's those little things
Yeah.
that kind of create the 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 it creates the fertile ground for that realignment to occur, if that makes
Well,
sense.
corruption creep.
Yes, I mean, you basically have to incentivize decorruption,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
we're if we take away the kind of the moral black and white of this, and we're just saying, we're just talking about this, like, are we going in the right direction, or are we off course? We're getting off course because there is some incentive for people to turn the steering wheel just a little bit, right? And there has to be some kind of incentive, or at least some kind of incentive, even if it's a very soft incentive, like being praised at work, to make those micro adjustments back.
I think we need to say something about generative systems, because we've spent 45 minutes on
Mm,
degenerative corrupt systems.
yes,
And the topic does include systems that heal and
yes,
systems that build and develop and lead
right.
to growth. And those do exist. Uh, so
They do.
let's do say a little bit. So the title will be true.
Yes. Well, a great example of this is our human body. I mean, if we're not taking care, we're not attentive to our body, it's going to degenerate. We're going to get old.
Right.
We can't reverse it. Obviously, we're not immortal, but we can offset things by being intentional about, for example, exercise. And I think the what I really feel in terms of these generative systems, there are these, what we were talking about. It's the micro adjustments and these feedback loops working together, and you're continually trying to bring the organization back onto that course that you want it to go on.
There-
So
There's one thing though, let me just jump in. There's
yes,
something else. Each system has a system of anchors.
yes,
And so you also, in both corrupt and generative systems, you need to take a look at what's anchoring uh,
yes,
the system in place, because those need to be addressed when you're
right.
shifting from degenerative to generative. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the generative and the iterative, we're talking about lots of repeated steps. And if you look at, like, physiologically, like how our bones, they call it bone remodeling. But when you're running or you do a new activity, your bones are not optimized for that activity, right? So a lot of people actually get injured right when they start a new thing, because their bones have not adjusted to the stress. But as you start to stress those bones, the little cells, they're called osteocytes, they're actually like, oh, there's new stresses here. I need to remodel the bone matrix to
Yeah,
transfer these new stresses more efficiently. So in a sense, the long-term goal is really predicated on these tiny little, like, it's a little feedback loop. That osteocyte is going, oh, there's a new stress here that I haven't felt. I'm going to build some more bone over here,
yeah,
right? And this is what needs to be happening in the organization. And it's this very long term. You
that's
you
right.
can't you
It's
can't
camera.
like, in a sense, the leader has to understand that addressing the problem in the organization is not just sending out a memo. It's like, you just can't be like, one memo and now that's everyone's going to obey and that's going to be taken care of. You know,
A lot of
it,
leaders say, well, I sent out a memo.
right, right. It's very much about taking this, you
Yeah.
know, this continued little things that are pushing us back on course. I don't know if that makes sense. It is very iterative and small steps. And the interesting thing about the osteocytes is they call it remodeling. They're actually breaking parts of the bone down and building new parts. And that speaks to
Like
your thing
muscles.
about the anchors. There are going to be things in your organization that are structural,
Mhm.
like anchors that are limiting or stopping it. And
Yeah.
the positive side of it, they're also stabilizing it, right?
Yes.
So is the stability helping you at that moment, or is it
That's
a
hindering.
detriment?
Yeah.
You know, so addressing like those little remodeling activities all throughout the organization, and then if there are major structural things that have to be addressed, then address those things.
All right.
But
Well,
think through the consequences before you make a big change, right?
we've went over our time, but we always do that.
Yeah.
Um, I try to keep it within 45 minutes. But anyway, with that, I'd like to thank you, Edwin. Once
Thank
again,
you.
I just love these conversations. Um, I think understanding corruption in the context of systems and generative systems as well, because you can use generative systems to kind of create that reciprocal, ledger,
Hmm. Hmm.
offset things and reverse the harm so that you can not only develop but sustain
Right.
something in the long term. So before we sign off, please tell our listeners how they can connect with you.
Yeah. So Edwin Clamp, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, Edwin Clamp, and my email is edwin@edwinclamp.com. Those are the easiest ways to find me.
All right.
Drop me a line.
Yes, please do. He's very interesting, as you can see, to talk to or hear, but you're not watching. So this has been Yvette Bethel and Edwin Clamp, and we'd like to thank you for joining us at Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Culture.
Thank you for listening to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Learn more about our proprietary trust, leadership, and culture courses and certifications at the IFB Academy. You can check them out at organizationalsoul.learnworlds.com.